So, the next aspect of comparative politics that we need to examine as far as regimes is concerned is that of the parliamentary democracy. So, liberal democracies, as we learned previously, they can vary. So we need to look a little bit about what these different variations of democracy look like. So, one way they vary is in the legislatures. The legislative branches can vary from democracy to democracy. The role of executives, the chief executive, the person who executes the laws or otherwise administers government, changes from democracy to democracy. And lastly, the political institutions, like the judicial branch, can vary from democracy to democracy. So the regime we're going to focus on in this chapter is parliamentary systems. So let's talk a little bit about what a parliamentary system is, what it looks like, and how it operates. So let's start with the role of the executive. And the executive is generally the most prominent office in a particular country. And it's the executive that carries out the laws and policies of the state, laws and policies that the state makes. In general, the executive has two major roles. The first is as the head of state. And this is a role that symbolizes and represents the people of a given country. This person is essentially the symbol of the population or the citizens of a particular country. And they represent the people either domestically as well as internationally. The more important role of the executive is head of government. So the head of government deals with everyday tasks of running the state, such as formulating domestic policy, working alongside cabinet ministers who are charged with specific policy areas like foreign affairs, defense, the economy, things like this. And so countries either combine or separate these two roles, head of state and head of government, to different degrees. Sometimes we have largely ceremonial heads of state, like the Queen of England, who doesn't necessarily have very significant political power, but represents the British people abroad. And again, as in the United Kingdom, we see the head of state separate from the head of government. And the head of government, the chief executive of, for example, Britain, or in parliamentary systems more broadly, is called the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister is directly elected by the parliamentary legislature, or parliament. It would be similar to if our president was elected by Congress and the Senate. So the people do not directly elect the chief executive in parliamentary systems. Rather, they elect their representatives, who in turn elect the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister then is essentially the chief of the majority party in Parliament. Once the Prime Minister is elected, the next step is to form a cabinet. So the cabinet are experts from the Prime Minister's party, brought from Parliament, and placed in positions of specific policy responsibilities. So there are the foreign minister, which would be similar to our Secretary of State, defense minister, our Secretary of Defense, etc. So what does this really mean? It means that in parliamentary systems we see a fusion between the executive and the legislative branch. In our system, we have that separation of powers between the executive and legislature. In parliamentary systems, they're really combined. Again, the Prime Minister is elected from Parliament by parliamentarians. The cabinet, the chief advisors in a parliamentary system, are also drawn from the legislature. So there's really no separation between executive and legislature in parliamentary systems. Another interesting aspect of a parliamentary system is the role of Parliament in maintaining control over the prime minister. So, unlike the American system, in which a president serves for 4 years and then is up for re-election, the British prime minister can be removed from office through a process called a vote of no confidence. So, if the parliament, again, of which the prime minister is a member, no longer believes that the prime minister is able to effectively govern, they can call for a vote of no confidence, in which the prime minister and his cabinet all have to resign and are replaced by a new prime minister and cabinet. So what is nice about this system is if the prime minister and cabinet are incapable of governing, they can be removed and replaced with someone new, as opposed to the American system where we're stuck, regardless of whether a president is ineffective or not, for 4 years.